Good morning and welcome back to the Morning Endurance Call. I'm Keith Erwood, and this is a free daily 15-minute or less leadership ritual for business owners, executives, and preparedness professionals who want to build stronger businesses, think more clearly under pressure, and lead with more clarity in uncertain times. Each weekday morning, we spend a few minutes talking about what it really takes to build stronger businesses, stronger leadership, and stronger preparedness in a world where disruption is part of reality. Today's topic is this: how to think about maximum tolerable downtime. This matters because one of the biggest mistakes organizations make is assuming that because something can technically be down for a period of time, it is therefore acceptable for it to be down that long. Those are not the same thing. A system may be unavailable for a day, a process may be interrupted for several hours, and a function may have a workaround. A team may find ways to cope temporarily. But none of that automatically tells you what the business can truly tolerate without unacceptable consequence. And that is why maximum tolerable downtime matters. Maximum tolerable downtime is not just a technical measure, it is not just a continuity term, and it is definitely not just a number to fill into a worksheet. At its core, it is a leadership question. It asks, how long can this critical function be disrupted before the business experiences unacceptable consequences? That is a very important question, because business preparedness becomes much more disciplined when leaders understand not just what is important, but how long disruption can be tolerated before the damage becomes too great. And that is where people often get confused. They hear terms like recovery time objective, downtime tolerance, business urgency, or service expectations, and they treat them as roughly the same thing. They are related, but they are not identical. Maximum tolerable downtime is about the outer boundary. It is the point beyond which the business says this is no longer acceptable, the consequences are too serious, the damage is too high, the risk is too great, the function must be restored or replaced before this threshold is crossed. That is what makes it so important. Because if leadership does not know where that line is, then recovery strategy can become unrealistic, investment decisions become weak, and continuity planning can drift into vague assumptions. And vague assumptions are expensive during disruption. Now, one of the biggest reasons maximum tolerable downtime is misunderstood is because many organizations think about downtime mainly in operational or technical terms. They ask, can the system stay down? Can the team wait? Can we manually work around this for a while? Can the process be delayed? Those are useful questions. But the deeper question is, at what point do the consequences become unacceptable to the business? That is the real issue. Because downtime does not become intolerable only when everything stops completely. It can become intolerable when customers are significantly affected, revenue is materially disrupted, regulatory obligations are missed, and reputational damage begins to grow, or manual workarounds begin to break down, and backlogs become unmanageable, and decision-making becomes unstable, or the organization starts losing control of the situation. That is why maximum tolerable downtime should always be tied to consequence, not convenience, not optimism, and certainly not assumption. Consequence. And this is one of the reasons I often say downtime tolerance is really consequence tolerance. That is how leaders should think about it. Because when you define downtime limits well, you're really defining how much disruption the business can absorb before the impact becomes unacceptable. That is a strategic conversation. Now, let's make it practical. What usually goes wrong when organizations define maximum tolerable downtime poorly? First, they often confuse it with what is technically achievable. For example, a team might say, "We can probably restore this in 24 hours." That may be true as a technical estimate, but that does not answer whether the business can tolerate 24 hours of a disruption. A technically achievable recovery timeline and business tolerable disruption thresholds are not the same thing. Second, organizations often choose downtime thresholds based on comfort rather than real analysis. They use round numbers, they make rough guesses, they adopt what sounds reasonable, and they even borrow assumptions from previous documents. They accept expectations that have never really been challenged. That may feel efficient, but it also weakens preparedness. Because if the tolerance is not grounded in real business consequence, it may be wrong in ways that matter a great deal when the disruption occurs. Third, leaders often underestimate how quickly consequences accumulate. A function may look tolerable for a few hours, but the real downstream consequences may begin much sooner than expected. Manual workarounds may buy some time, but not as much as assumed. Customer patience may be thinner than expected, and operational backlog may build faster than expected. Also, decision pressure may increase faster than expected. That is why downtime needs to be examined honestly. And fourth, some organizations treat all important functions as if they have the same tolerance. They do not. Different functions have different consequence profiles. Some can be interrupted briefly with manageable impact, and others become unacceptable very quickly. Some are financially sensitive, some are customer sensitive, some are compliance sensitive, while others are operationally fragile because of dependencies. And that variation matters. This is where business impact analysis becomes very valuable. A strong BIA helps the organization determine not just what is important, but how quickly consequences become serious if specific functions are disrupted. That helps leaders think more clearly about downtime limits, because maximum tolerable downtime should not be defined in a vacuum. It should be informed by the following: business consequence, customer impact, financial impact, dependency relationships, manual workaround viability, regulatory considerations, and of course, leadership judgment about what the organization can and cannot accept. That is how the numbers become meaningful. Now, I want to highlight something important. Maximum tolerable downtime is not the same thing as a goal. It is a limit. It is not saying this is when we hope to recover. It actually is saying this is the point beyond which the business considers the disruption unacceptable. That distinction matters because many organizations mistakenly treat the maximum tolerable downtime as if it were the recovery target. But really, it should shape the recovery targets. It tells leaders how much time exists before the situation becomes unacceptable. That means recovery objectives should usually aim to stay inside that limit with enough margin to account for reality. And that is a leadership conversation. Because if the business says a function becomes unacceptable after 8 hours, but actual recovery capability is closer to 24, then there's a serious gap, and that gap needs to be acknowledged. Not admired, not ignored, acknowledged. That gap may signal the need for stronger recovery strategy, better continuity planning, and more resilient process design. It should also account for more additional testing, more realistic leadership assumptions, and different investment decisions. That is why maximum tolerable downtime can be so powerful. It reveals where business expectation and recovery reality do not match, and that matters because misalignment creates fragility. This connects directly to endurance, because endurance in business is the ability to continue operating, make sound decisions, recover intelligently, and keep moving forward under pressure over time. A business strengthens endurance when it understands how long critical functions can truly be disrupted before consequences become unacceptable. Without that understanding, leaders may underestimate urgency, overestimate tolerance, and therefore underprepare for disruption. But when downtime limits are defined clearly and honestly, preparedness becomes more grounded. Recovery priorities get sharper, decision making becomes faster, capability gaps become visible, and leadership conversations become more realistic. That is the value. Now here is a practical way to think about maximum tolerable downtime as a leader. Ask, what happens after 1 hour? What happens after 4 hours? What happens after 1 business day? And after 2 days? At what point do consequences move from inconvenient to serious? And then at what point do they become unacceptable? That progression is useful because the business does not usually go from fine to failure instantly. The consequences build, and leadership becomes stronger when it understands that progression clearly. It also helps to avoid one of the biggest preparedness traps. Pretending that we can work around it is the same as the business is tolerating it well. Those are not the same. A workaround may reduce total failure, but it may still be creating delay, friction, backlog, stress, error, lost revenue, or reputational damage, and a decrease in the morale of your staff. So tolerance should never be defined only by whether some reduced form of activity is still possible. It should be defined by whether the level of consequences remains acceptable. That is a more honest standard. So here is today's leadership takeaway. Maximum tolerable downtime is not just about how long something can be down. It is about how long the business can absorb that disruption before the consequences become unacceptable. That is the real lens. So here's today's question for you. For one of your most critical functions, do you clearly know the point at which downtime stops being merely inconvenient and becomes unacceptable to the business? That is an important question, because the clearer that answer is, the more realistically the business can prepare. Thank you for joining me today on the Morning Endurance Call. If this is the kind of thinking is useful to you, then please join our free endurance community. That is where I'm sharing additional resources, tools, live learnings, and ongoing conversations for business owners, executives, and practitioners who want to build stronger businesses through preparedness, leadership, and endurance. The link will be below in the description. Next week, we'll be talking about why business continuity is a leadership discipline. Until then, think clearly, prepare deliberately, lead with endurance. Thanks for joining. Bye now.